Federal government should not be involved nearly as much as what it is. We're talking about $6.5 trillion budget in our economy, which makes up nearly 25% of our economy. This is just massive, shouldn't be there. We've got to do something else. Less spending is the big issue. Hello, welcome to this week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. With the election over, it's time to get to work. The newly elected Trump administration will take office in January 20th, and Congress will reconvene with majorities of Republicans in the Senate and the House. They must tackle the many challenges America faces. What I'm proposing is a federal policy agenda for our nation's leaders in this special edition of this week's Economy Show. I propose 3 solutions that will let people prosper. Substack subscribers, y'all can download my complimentary Let People Prosper policy agenda to show my appreciation for you. You can watch this episode on YouTube, listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else where you get this. And don't forget to check out my website at vanceginn.com and my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. Go ahead and be a paid subscriber as well. That would be huge. So what exactly is this federal policy agenda? Number 1, less spending. Imagine that, right? The situation is the U.S. is facing a fiscal crisis. The national debt of $36 trillion is projected to add another $20 trillion over the next decade, which means about $2 trillion a year in deficits is just what they're projecting just with current law, not any other changes or anything else that's going on. This growing debt is contributing to inflation, which is driven, of course, by the Federal Reserve printing and buying that debt and putting more money in circulation than the supply of goods and services. Therefore, you get higher prices and inflation throughout the economy. This erodes purchasing power of Americans and for families, and it creates economic uncertainty for both businesses and households. Excessive government spending, which is the true burden of government, no matter which government we're talking about, is fueling this inflation. It's increasing pressure for future tax hikes, and it's distorting market dynamics, all undermining long-term economic growth and even economic growth today and less opportunity in the process, okay? My proposals are that the Trump administration should act on this. The Trump White House should prioritize a budget that significantly reduces federal spending, prioritizing long-term fiscal stability. This means that they're also going to need to look at not only discretionary spending, but look at there shouldn't be any sacred budget cows, if you will, throughout the budget. We've got to look at Social Security type of reforms that make sure that it's helpful for retirees along for those who are currently paying into the system. And also Medicare, which is bankrupting the country in the process and also not providing the care that really should be provided out there. We need a more market-based healthcare system at the end of the day. And there's got to be some ways to get us there. Okay. Also national defense should be on the chopping block. They should be looking at Department of Education and so many other areas to eliminate, because there's no constitutional roles for the government to be involved in these situations anyway. In fact, they should be sending it back to the states and to people. That's really what this federalist system is all about in our constitutional republic. Let's get back to that. By implementing a priority-based budgeting process, which looks at zero-based budgeting along with tackling performance-based budgeting as well, funds can be redirected to the most critical needs, making cuts that preserve essential services while ensuring some sort of efficiency. Government's not too efficient regardless, but let's try to make sure that they're not too broad in this process as well. There should be pressure on Congress. President Trump can leverage his platform as president, right, and making the bully pulpit a way to advocate for fiscal discipline in Washington. Imagine that. Additionally, creating a task force modeled after the proposed Department of Government Efficiency, if not just that one, which is outside of government, which is not funded by taxpayer dollars. All of that should be left to the private sector. It looks much like the Grace Commission by the Reagan administration, and many states are even looking at this. Louisiana's Governor Jeff Landry has just proposed doing something very similar. I'd rather that not be within government, but be outside of government. But that's something else to look at here. And if we're able to do that, we could bring private sector leaders together to identify areas of waste and inefficiency, helping to reduce unnecessary government spending. I'll be glad to be on any of those types of boards from outside of government and use the extent of the influence that many people have across the economy, including myself, where I can be helpful to really push the envelope to say, you know what, we've got to have spending restraint in the process. And if the president also can get involved with this, which he wasn't too interested in spending restraint in the first administration, I know that directly from being at OMB, hopefully that has changed now, given the fiscal situation is much different than it was just a few years ago. So congressional action here is that it's time for Congress to pass a balanced budget that prioritizes spending cuts over any tax hikes. The budget should include firm spending limits, as I've talked about, basing it on population growth plus inflation as a maximum, not a target, but a maximum, prioritizing funding for essential programs and transition some, if not most, federal programs to block grants to encourage local control and efficiency. Federal government should not be involved nearly as much as what it is. We're talking about a $6.5 trillion budget in our economy, which makes up nearly 25% of our economy. This is just massive. Shouldn't be there. We've got to do something else. Less spending is the big issue. Okay. Number 2, promote prosperity. Well, the situation is that Americans face growing financial pressures due to stagnant inflation adjusted wages and historically low savings. Rising costs are straining household budgets nationwide. While government spending isn't the direct cause of inflation, the Federal Reserve, which is the direct cause of inflation, or their overprinting of money, their debt purchases have contributed significantly to rising prices, and that's unlikely to be restrained anytime soon, given that their balance sheet is still so large. My proposals here is to look at the economic challenges from a pro-growth economic strategy, requiring more tax cuts or short-term fixes. That's got to be a part of this, but it's got to be bigger than that, okay? It demands a disciplined approach to federal spending, a commitment to free trade, and a regulatory environment that empowers businesses rather than hinders them. There should be massive regulatory cuts. The Biden administration added $1.8, nearly $2 trillion during the last 4 years. This is unsustainable. It's driving a huge wedge in our economy, and the Trump administration should at least roll all that back, if not even more compared to what they were doing before. Okay. By focusing on those pillars, lawmakers can address inflation, foster sustainable growth, and create a more prosperous future for all Americans. The Trump administration action, right, should push Congress to curb excessive spending, as we talked about before, and encourage the Federal Reserve to reduce its balance sheet. There should be some level of independence here. I don't really want politicians running Federal Reserve or monetary policy. In fact, I don't want a central bank at all. I want the marketplace to do that, as we should end the Fed as quickly as possible. But at the same time, the president can make suggestions to what the Federal Reserve could do. And I think the biggest thing here is not interest rates, but is on their balance sheet. That is really what's distorting the markets and creating more inflationary pressures throughout the economy. And to do all this, we'll promote market clarity and efficiency. The administration should work to remove price controls, antitrust overreach, protectionist policies, and other regulations that restrict market forces. And on the congressional priorities, right, Congress must work to cut spending and adopt sustainable budgeting practices. It must also expand tax cuts and make the Trump tax cuts permanent, and reform the tax cuts as much as possible, or tax reform as much as possible, so that people have more money in their pockets, and that we have a flat tax with the lowest rate possible. I think those are the types of things that we really need to get to have the most prosperity moving forward. In addition, Congress must promote free markets and implement regulatory relief to reduce hidden costs for American consumers. The overturn of the Chevron deference is really important here, but this also means that Congress must be more explicit, not be so vague in their language, so that way they could be making more of the decisions, our elected members, instead of bureaucrats in DC. All right. Number 3, preserve liberty. The situation is that government overreach is driving up costs, limiting choices, and lowering quality in critical sectors such as healthcare and energy and education. A solution is needed to empower individuals, reduce expenses, and improve service quality. There's a great opportunity here for the Trump administration and Congress, the Republicans, right, to have a unique way to create a more dynamic economy by supporting pro-growth limited government policies. Reducing regulations, empowering individuals, and devolving control of states will strengthen the economy, protect individual liberty, and ensure access to affordable, high-quality services. That's what we need. Get government out of the way. That's not the answer. It's not more government. It's less government. It's more in the private sector, okay? The game plan for Trump is that Americans rely on many government programs that often take a one-size-fits-all approach. Instead, President Trump should advocate for decentralization in healthcare, education, transportation, and energy. This can be achieved by shifting more power to the states and individuals, allowing for more tailored, efficient solution. For example, empowering states to innovate with Medicaid, other programs through federal waivers and block grants would give them greater flexibility. Reducing regulatory burdens in these key sectors and more will also promote competition and lower cost, helping families in the process. There's also going to be a promotion of energy independence. Fiscal discipline drives sustainable growth and encourages private sector solutions over costly public spending. Congress could also shift health spending away from employers and toward individuals by strengthening health savings accounts and transitioning tax benefits to give patients more control over their healthcare decisions and unleash energy across the economy, whether it's nuclear, all of the above strategy. But let's get government out of the way. Let's end the Inflation Reduction Act. Let's get rid of the tax breaks and subsidies for any renewable sources of energy and any other things that's going on with with the unrenewable or the reliable sources of energy. That's something that's going to be so important here. So those are my big three things for the federal government that I think will head us in the right direction to let people prosper. Don't forget to get your complimentary guide on all these policies and more at Substack, vanceginn.substack.com. So, and I'm going to have more with this very soon. Next week, I'm going to talk about state solutions and what they should be looking at for those policymakers going into the legislative sessions in 2025. We got a lot of big things coming up, okay? Thanks for joining me in this episode of This Week's Economy. For more insights, visit vanceginn.com and get a paid subscription to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com today to receive these insights right in your inbox every week. God bless you and let people prosper.